السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا Muhammad وعلى أهله وصحبه أجمعين. We start in the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon our dear beloved Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam. I'm so excited for all of you to join us this morning in this session, and hope you have been enjoying all the sessions so far in this convention. May Allah bless the team at Mass for the endless and behind the scenes work that they're doing to make sure the convention is brought to you virtually this year. We pray and make dua for all those who've been impacted by the global COVID-19 pandemic, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant shifa, healing and speedy recovery for all those who are ill and all those who have been severely impacted by this pandemic. In today's session, we are going to discuss the ideological landscape of America that's facing Muslims and kind of dive deep with our distinguished speakers, Dr. Hatem Bazian, as well as Sister Dalia Mogahed. And so just before we kind of get started on this conversation, I want us to ground us in an understanding of the times that we're living in today. Our dear beloved Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said in a hadith that's been, just paraphrased, that Islam began as something strange and it will go back to being something strange. Glad tidings to the stranger. We understand Islam to be a comprehensive system and a way of life that goes beyond just teaching us how to pray, teaching us how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Islam exists in a lived reality, and it's a comprehensive system that teaches us how to navigate both politically, economically, in our lives, in our homes, in our daily interactions with our fellow human beings. And understanding that Islam is comprehensive and is something more than just a spiritual connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but a way of living, kind of helps us remember the hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, when he told us to take that which is good from the cultures that we interact with, but understand that we're carrying this present with us, this gift from Allah Azza wa Jal, this light that's meant to really illuminate every corner of this world, as the Prophet ﷺ was sent as a mercy to mankind. So in understanding and navigating, whether it's here in America or whether it's in Europe or whether it's somewhere else, I want to bring up a point that was mentioned by Dr. Bilal Wara yesterday, our historian, in our session about the legacy of Islam in America. That Islam is often painted as something strange, as something foreign, as something that does not belong. But in reality, Islam has been part of the fabric and the inception, even before this country became a country, even before America became a country and it was founded as a country. We know that our dear brothers and sisters in the African American community, those who were enslaved and brought here, brought Islam with them, subhanAllah. And we understand, just the presence of Islam in Europe throughout. So nowadays, when they try to paint Islam as being something other, something foreign, and something that does not belong, remember this legacy, remember the roots and the giants of, individuals that and civilizations that came before us that were standing on their shoulders today. And so as we dive into the ideological landscape with our distinguished speakers, just have that sense of pride of knowing who you are and what your legacy is. And inshallah, Dr. Hatem will open with you. Alhamdulillah, it's such an honor to have you here with us. I've been following your work for over 10 years, and it's just been absolutely phenomenal. May Allah bless you and continue to grant you tawfiq. Dr. Hatem Bazian is the founder and national chair of American Muslims for Palestine. He's also a co-founder and professor of Islamic law and theology at Zaytuna College, the first accredited Muslim liberal arts college in the United States. In addition, Professor Dr. Hatem Bazian is a lecturer in the departments of Near Eastern and Asian Americans and Asian Diaspora Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Bazian, between 2002 to 2007, also served as an adjunct professor of law at Boalt Hall School of Law at the University of California, Berkeley. He teaches courses on Islamic law and society, Islam in America, communities and institutions, deconstructing Islamophobia and othering of Islam, religious studies, and Middle Eastern studies. In addition to Berkeley, Professor Bazian served as a visiting professor in religious studies at St. Mary's College of California in 2001-2007, an advisor to the Religion, Politics, and Globalization Center at UC Berkeley. In spring of 2009, Professor Bazian founded at Berkeley the Islamophobia Research and Documentation Project at the Center for Race and Gender, a research unit dedicated to the systematic study of othering Islam and Muslims. Dr. Bazian, in spring of 2012, launched the Islamophobia Studies Journal, which is published biannually through a collaborative effort between the Islamophobia Research and Documentation Project of the Center for Race and Gender at the University of California at Berkeley, the Arab and Muslim Ethnicities and Diasporas Initiative for the School of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State University, the Center for Islamic Studies at the Graduate Theological Union, the International Center for Muslim and Non-Muslim Understanding at the University of South Australia and Zaytuna College. In addition to academic work, Dr. Bazian is a weekly columnist for the Turkish daily Sabah newspaper and Turkey Agenda online magazine. Dr. Bazian is also a member of the Islamic Scholarship Fund, Muslim Legal Fund of America, president of Dollar for Deen Charity, and chair of Northern California Islamic Council. So much of the work that you do really helps and informs us, especially those like me who are on the political forefront and tackling both the Islamophobia industry and navigating through political landscapes. So Dr. Bazian, if you can just take us away and ground us in understanding what the landscape is today and how, especially as a Muslim community, can we be aware of the challenges, the obstacles, as well as the opportunities that present in these current times.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. First, جزاكم الله خير اسمهان and Mass for both the invitation and for having the session to really discuss such critical issues at this time. I've been participating in Mass convention both national and regionally for the longest period of time, and it's always good to be with brothers and sisters that are dedicated to building and making transformation for the community. It's very difficult these days for us to be in the same place, but I guess modern technology has made it possible for us to continue to be connected, linked, and attending to the matters of the communities that we are all part of. First, let me offer my condolences to all our brothers and sisters that have lost family members to COVID-19, both in here as well as across the world. These are difficult circumstances. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and we often tend to forget the heavy toll that this pandemic has had on Muslim communities in the US and abroad. I'm reminded of the initial spread of the pandemic in New York, in the Brooklyn area, where a large number of Muslim brothers and sisters were impacted and lost their life. So we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to shower them with blessings, to raise their abode in paradise, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala overlook all their shortcomings. And I ask Allah to give their families patience as they heal and confront the calamity of loss. But rest assured that we will gather with them at the gates of paradise with our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The question of the ideological landscape in the United States. And I think it's important for us to both think of the ideological landscape outside in the general society, but also to speak about its impact or reverberation and possibly its reflection inside the Muslim community in the United States. I always tend to say that Muslims are socially conservative but fiscally progressive. And that puts us in a dilemma in a sense. And maybe it's reflect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's call upon us, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وُسْطًى, that we have made you into a middle nation, So even as we think of the United States political landscape, political ideological landscape, that it is not very easy for Muslims to fit in one box, political or ideological box, because there are certain issues where Muslims as a community nationally would fall on the political right, or what we call the political right on the conservative end, while in certain issues the Muslim would fall on the political left. And there are certain issues that the Muslims will almost abstain totally from it, in essence, because of the particular issue goes against the established moral and ethical foundation for the tradition. So if I want to look at the political ideological landscape in particular in the United States, and in examining this, one has to look at a 50-year period rather than a very short time period, because we would fail to recognize the long trends that have evolved and developed. So we could say that on the bigger picture, we have two major ideological camps. What we broadly would speak is the ideological right and the ideological left. But that also is very problematic or simplistic to put it, in that there is these two large camps ideologically, because within each camp there's a cluster of ideological groupings in there, and they're by no means identical. And sometimes we find that on certain issues that there might be a meeting place between the ideological right and the ideological left. So in those clusters, the ideological right and the ideological left. If we think about the ideological right, there's a cluster of groups that constitute this ideological right. So, for example, one of the big segments in the ideological right is the evangelical Christian right. So the evangelical Christian right, in essence, constitute one big segment within the landscape, the American ideological landscape. They tend to be heavily Islamophobic. They tend to support many of the anti-Sharia legislation that we see spread around the United States. They're heavily into supporting U.S. military intervention, heavily pro-Israel for both ideological and theological reasons. And in essence, they do see or have increasingly been engaged within the political process, even though that prior to the 1970s, the evangelical right was actually outside of politics, or instead apolitical, if you want to use that term. They actually stayed at a distance from the political landscape. It is actually in the mid-70s, and in particular as Ronald Reagan undertook his political engagement, that the evangelical right became far more active politically and engaged. So you have the Christian evangelical right, and often we actually at least find an interaction with the evangelical right. Now, in here, a point of caution, that in areas or on issues of sexual identity, on issues of abortions and so on, so you'll find that Muslims might actually resonate with the evangelical right. So you might see cooperation existing on issues pertaining to those, and sometimes also on religious freedoms, where you see the cooperation. But I think this is a mistaken alliance on issues, because fundamentally within the evangelical right, the strong stream is actually to completely not include Muslims as co-participants in the society. So I'll set aside the evangelical right and the challenges that are posed by their strength in this country. Some estimates would put their numbers into overall at 70 million, some less. But in general, it is one of the most important constituents relative to the ideological right. The second group, which we have experienced their impact on policy, is the neoconservatives. Even though that these days we don't identify the neoconservative in any of our discussions and debate, but they are still very much present and very much influential on the ideological right. So for anyone that follows the work of the American Enterprise Institute in the United States, as well as their engagement in Europe and partnership with even Modi of India in relations to their work, the conservative dimension of the neoconservative agenda is very clear, and those who were followed the Iraq War, the interventionist policies of the United States. If you just think recently in terms of John Bolton, who is accounted as part of the neoconservative movement. Again, the neoconservative are highly Islamophobic, support the Islamophobia industry, constantly assert the right of intervention and regime change. And if you want to look at the footprints of the anti-Iran policies in the United States, in particular those that attempted to disrupt the US-Iran deal, comes in essence have the neoconservative footprint on it, and at least they have a disruptive factor. Now, when we think of the neoconservative, there is also a neoconservative on the political left, in essence. So these would be individuals that view the world through neoconservative political ideological lens, but they also exist on the center left. And if you want to identify some of their groupings, these were around Hillary Clinton, and also were engaged in the foreign policy of Obama's year, a neoconservative left that engages in intervention policies, very close in relations to Israel and India, also have relations to neoconservatism in Europe as well. So that's a neoconservatism that exists on the political right, but has its resonance and has its effect and its counterpart on the ideological left. Now, also on the political, on the ideological right, there's a cluster of pro-military groupings, also pro-gun rights, the clusters of Second Amendment individuals that might sometimes vote on certain issues on the left, but they actually are mobilized on the ideological right within the United States. And I'm describing here certain patterns of thinking, certain ideological patterns, and a number of groups and organizations will fit under this cluster of the ideological right. Now, it's very clear for us when we look at Supreme Court appointments that the dominant issues that are put on the table predominantly revolves around abortion, which really is a nod to the evangelical Christian right, but also to segments of the Catholic constituency and Catholic Church. Segments of the Catholic Church actually vote on the right on these issues, while also participate in voting on the left. So in essence, they might reflect or be almost mirroring some Muslim political engagement, ideological engagement. In some of the research in terms of where are the heavy opposition to Muslims, within the political ideological right, actually both the evangelical right and the Catholics tended to have the highest polling data in negative attitude toward Muslims. And therefore, they both are hospitable arenas for actually embracing anti-Muslim policies, anti-Muslim discourses, especially in regions where Muslims are not present, in order to either engage or counter or have a systematic engagement. So outside of the major cities, you have the dilemma of both the evangelical right and then the segments of the Catholics that have heavily anti-Islamophobic sentiment, anti-Muslim sentiment, and might support domestic policies as well as transnational policies that are to the detriment of Muslims, Muslim interests and Muslim point of view, and also might result in the continuation of wars and conflicts in Muslim lands. So the last part that I want to address in terms of the ideological right is the rising tide of right-wing populism, which draws support from all these other segments that are there. And right-wing populism is shaped by the almost 30 to 40 years political, economic, social, immigration, demographic change in the United States. And right-wing populism is heavily centered on pushing and promoting a particular worldview of white supremacy. So when right-wing populists say the people, they really are not including all the people that are people, but they're actually speaking specifically and giving a nod to white supremacy as the symbolic representation of the people. The reason for its accelerated success or accelerated emergence in the United States, again, one has to look to a long period of time. This is a reactionary movement. And I dated actually to immediately after the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act, and the Immigration Reform of 1965, you had a wide backlash. The initial articulation of this backlash was the shift of Southern Democrats into Republicans, meaning that they wanted to maintain their racist attitudes and perspective, and felt that the Democratic Party have left them and went to embrace Black America at the time with these three fundamental changes. And the work to undo these gains at least traveled through the ebbs and flows of America's domestic political landscape as well as international. And it's, again, this is a process that the white backlash took shape after the vote after the success of Obama. So Obama's presidency, aside, again, I could spend the whole time critiquing his policies, but one aspect of Obama's election, it actually brought the whole idea of white fragility and discomfort, and also the notion or the idea that has been pushed that we're losing our country to the minorities, to blacks, to the immigrants. So it was not really an issue of that they have an economic pain and so on, but actually it is a thought of losing their social status, their positioning, in a sense, as being the superior, being in the leadership, that this is our country, and the whole motion of trying to take our country back. And I argued then that people who began to use the birther movement and using that Obama is a closet Muslim, which interestingly, again, the first to push this idea that Obama is a closet Muslim was the Democrat, Hillary Clinton, in a way to undermine Obama's standing in the Democratic primaries. And then it was picked up by the Republicans. And as we see, the birther movement that began with Obama's presidency in his win in 2008 ended up having us a Trump in 2016. So again, we could see that those who wanted to use the M word on Obama really wanted to use the N word, but felt comfortable in using the M word, that then opened the society to be accepting of the using the N word. And then you have the torches being held by people in Charlottesville. So again, this is a process of transformation that occurs with the right-wing populism, 50 year in the process, responding to global change, setting on of economic transformation, the collapse of the manufacturing, increased immigration, and with it intensification of xenophobia. And now, in essence, populist messaging is resonating with some Muslims because, again, they use certain aspect of Muslim conservatism to resonate those messages, and especially this notion that the right-wing populism have not invaded Muslim countries and did not actually cause death and destruction like before. And in here is a statement that partially true, but does not give the whole picture, because in the current period of U.S. right-wing populism, they subcontracted death and destruction to other countries. For example, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia's death and destruction in Yemen and Libya is not spoken of because, again, the United States is selling them weapons, and then their close relationship with Israel makes it possible to the United States to come out smelling good, or the fact that President Trump suppressed reporting on drone attacks, which all indications that drone attacks during Trump administration was doubled. But if a tree falls in the forest and nobody has tweeted about it or put it on Instagram, did it really fall? So, but that again resonates with certain segments of the Muslim community. So we need to understand that part. Now, I want to quickly, I think I have a few minutes to speak about the ideological left. And the ideological left, again, I said it's a cluster that is there. So from the far left to the anarchists, to communists, to socialists, to mainstream Democrats, to a variety of different groupings within the Black community, the Black churches, progressive churches that exist in the United States, the Presbyterians, the Unitarians, the Universalists. All these constitute a whole cluster of left. But you also, within the left, you have the humanitarian interventionist left that sees that to intervene, which again comes out from the same landscape. The left that again sees religion in an antagonistic, not only that in neutral in religion, but actually antagonistic toward religion. So both in the United States, individuals like Bill Maher, who brings another sidekick to him to constantly demonize Muslims in relations to particular attitude and perspective in relations to antagonism toward religion. So in this sense, you could see that this is part of the political left. But also within the political left, you have the sexual identity grouping in there. And I think Muslims who are looking at the LGBTQ issues, looking at abortion issues, and so on, these are the points of tension, ideological tensions, but also tensions of how to relate or how to develop relations with a political left that on the majority of Muslim population, in essence, on those issues will actually be more on the conservative right. And in this sense, there are often a critique that comes to play in relations to Muslims of how do you actually develop alliances. So on the one hand, you have a left that is anti-war, that might be fiscally progressive on taxations, on government, but on the other issues relative to identity, those becomes a point of tension, both ideological tensions, but also organizational tensions of how the Muslim community actually can to respond and be at least empowered and engaged in the broader political landscape. So I know that my time is coming to conclusion. I do think that the Muslim community in the United States need to have a deeper reading of both the ideological landscape, but also to think of its own ideological priorities in order to understand that not every battle you need to actually take. And you need to set your priorities institutionally, especially Muslims are of 1.2 or 1.5 million in this country, not million, percent. And therefore, you have to actually articulate a set of priorities that are coherent and consistent with your ethical, moral worldview founded in the Quran and on the Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, but also have a set of priorities for engagement in the broader society. I do believe that we have a role to play in bringing about the transformation and to think from an deep Islamic moral and ethical foundation to offer our way to improve the society that we are part of. I think this is encompassed in the Prophet ﷺ, خَيْرُكُمْ خَيْرُكُمْ لِلنَّاسِ. The best of you is the best to mankind, and I do think that what we need is to offer what do we offer to mankind in co-participant in making the world a better place. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Definitely a much deeper conversation for us to have. I wish we had more than the time that's allocated. It's hard to have these conversations without also really discussing the framework of white supremacy, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. Again, we don't have as much time allotted, inshallah, but Dr. Hatem Bazian, your work speaks for itself, and we hope to have you in future conversations on these very important topics. At the landscape of America, really thinking about what is our role as Muslims, because we can't just be spectators. We can't just be sitting on the sidelines and watching just things unfold. As we said in the beginning, Islam is a comprehensive system, subhanAllah. So in understanding that system, in understanding being of that balanced middle nation, how can we make sure that in this space that we're existing, in this time frame that we're existing, that we're spreading that which is good, forbidding that which is evil, and showing up in such a way that we're forced to be reckoned with, as we've seen in the past election on November 3rd. Just seeing the number of Muslims that turned out to vote and make an impact, the number of folks who are elected into office from our community, and so on and so forth. So there's definitely a lot of work and a much deeper conversation for us to have to really discuss what a lot of the points of tension that you mentioned, inshallah. So next we will have our dear sister, Dalia Mogahed. Sister Dalia Mogahed is the Director of Research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, where she leads the organization's pioneering research and thought leadership programs on American Muslims. Dalia Mogahed is a former executive director of the Gallup Center for Muslim Studies, where she led the analysis of surveys of Muslim communities worldwide. With John L. Esposito, she co-authored the book, Who Speaks for Islam? What a Billion Muslims Really Think. President Barack Obama appointed Dalia Mogahed to the President's Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships in 2009. She was invited to testify before the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations about U.S. engagement with Muslim communities. Her 2016 TED Talk was named one of the top TED Talks that year. She's a frequent expert commentator in global media outlets and international forums. She is also the CEO of Mogahed Consulting. and she will be talking to us about how to navigate a lot of these ideological differences in order to really reform society to where we think it should be. Again, just to reiterate the vision of MAS, to build a just and virtuous society. What does it mean for us as Muslims in playing a role in making that happen?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Dalia Mogahed, and I am the Director of Research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. I want to talk to you today about navigating all of the different ideologies that are out there and how Muslims can stand as a voice of principle and values amongst the competing voices of special interests and identity politics. First, I want to say that I'm so honored to be speaking to you today and participating in this important conference with the Muslim American Society. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. I was asked to speak about this important topic, I guess, as a part of discussing the aftermath of this election. We have witnessed one of the most divisive periods of our country's history. The last 4 years and even this election, unprecedented. We're already in the end of November, and the sitting president has yet to concede that he, in fact, lost the election. We have basically the country split in half. One group believing that there was mass voter fraud and that the sitting president is actually the winner of the election, despite all evidence to the contrary. And then the other half of the country just trying to see how, hoping and praying that we don't end up resorting to problems in just the peaceful transition of power, which used to be something we took for granted. And so we are in this moment of incredible polarization where we don't even see the same reality in our own country. The facts, just simple facts, aren't taken for granted, aren't things that people agree on. Everyone seems to be living in their own world. And with social media, that is made even more possible by living in our social bubble, only listening and hearing news sources that we already agree with. And we have algorithms in our social media that make sure of that make sure that we are only hearing what we agree with and therefore want to hear more of. Now, what do we do? How do we navigate this world as Muslims, as believers in God, as followers of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? It is incredibly difficult. And I say that because we as Muslims are not immune. We're not immune to this polarization. So much of this division has bled into our communities as well. In one exit poll in this past election found that 34% of Muslims voted for President Trump, and the remainder, roughly 65%, voted for President-elect Biden. Now, those numbers are reflective of many communities. The Jewish community is very similar, as is the Latino community. So it's not that Muslims are dramatically different from other minority groups. But we do see that there isn't agreement. There isn't a uniform belief among our community of what is best for this country, what is best for this community, despite seeing a president that ran, literally made part of his platform the total shutdown of Muslims entering the country. And yet there's this division. We also have found in our research, I'm as I mentioned, the Director of Research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. And what we do at ISPU is we make sure that dialogue and decisions concerning our community is well informed. And we do that by conducting rigorous academic research and putting that research in the right hands. We disseminate the research widely to community leaders, to policymakers, to the media, and to ordinary citizens just like you and me. What we found in our last poll, this is a scientific survey of American Muslims as well as Americans of other faiths and no faith, is that there is incredible division in the community as to who we see as our natural allies. I was really taken aback by these findings. We asked people in our community, in the Muslim community, a series of 4 questions on who they thought we should build coalitions with. And the first question was about Black Lives Matter. And that is the only group with which a majority of Muslims agreed we should be building alliances with. And there, 65% of American Muslims believe that, or say they support building greater alliances with Black Lives Matter with the Muslim community. Now, obviously, a third of our community is Black. This is not like 2 separate communities. Of course, there's a huge overlap. But even among non-Black Muslims, there is enormous support for the movement for Black lives and a huge opposition to police brutality. And so this is something that most Muslims believe, most Muslims see as a priority for them, but not everybody. In fact, it's only 65%. I mean, that 65% is around the percentage of Muslims who voted for Biden. And so, it gives you a picture. Even though it was the highest of any faith community that expressed support for the movement for Black lives, it is still not unanimous. It's still a majority, but not unanimous. So there was some degree of division. But where there was far more division is on the next 3 questions. The first one was, or the second one rather, is about building coalitions with religious conservatives working on, quote, religious liberty issues. And there, a half of Muslims said that they would support building these coalitions, and a half said that they wouldn't. The next one was on activists working on pro-life activists. And again, it was split right in half. Half supported and half didn't. And then finally, the fourth one was building coalitions with groups working on LGBTQ rights. And there, 35% of Muslims supported and the remainder did not. And interestingly, this is on par with the Catholic community as well as the general public. So Muslims aren't very different, but there was also this lack of unanimity. And I give you these numbers because we have to start with these facts if we're going to think about what to do next. We can't go into this conversation believing that everyone believes like we do, and that's kind of one issue that I run into a lot when I'm talking to Muslims around the country. Is there is a belief that we are homogeneous. Not only is this a belief about us, but we believe this about ourselves, that every Muslim is just like me. Every Muslim believes just like me. That's the first thing, is to dispel that myth. We are not in agreement. There is not uniformity. We are very, very split on many of these hot button issues. So what do we do from here? Where do we go from here? What is the path forward in this confusing time where who our allies are isn't clear, who we should be building coalitions with isn't clear. There isn't unity among ourselves toward what we want to do. And I offer this, the following thoughts, because it's not an easy answer by any means. I think some of our guiding principles first needs to be that we have to put principle over politics. And here's what I mean by that. So many of these discussions are about what is good for me, what is good for my personal individual interests. And a lot less of it is about where is the principle here? And if we can start to, before even talking about what our politics are, what our platform is, talk about what are we as a community going to stand for? What do we want to see realized in our society? Because it's a myth to believe that one side or the other is a perfect match for our values. I've heard it said that if the right weren't so racist, that we would agree with them on everything else. I actually don't think that's true at all. First of all, yes, the right is more racist than the left. And this is just an empirical fact. This isn't being partisan. It's simply relaying actual research and data to you. One of the predictors of being a Trump supporter, whether you're a Muslim, this even includes Muslim Trump supporters, or a non-Muslim, is being Islamophobic. When you endorse anti-Muslim tropes, when you oppose Black Lives Matter, you are more likely to be a Trump supporter. And that includes Muslims. Yes, Muslims endorse anti-Muslim tropes too. And those who do are more likely to be Trump supporters. So yes, the right is more racist and more Islamophobic than is the left. In fact, one of the strongest predictors of Islamophobia in our research when we do linear regressions is being a Republican. Partisanship, unfortunately. This is not, no offense to all the Republicans out there who might be listening, this is nothing personal against you, this is just simply the facts. So is it true that if we were to remove that blemish, that problem of racism, Islamophobia, then everything else would be in line with our values? The answer is absolutely not. Yes, there are some, of course, shared values around the importance of family and traditional family values, and the sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman, etc. Gender roles, or just gender as a reality. All of these things, most Muslims would probably agree with. Now, there are other things, though, that are important to many, many Muslims, are important and are in fact central to our faith, that we don't share with the right. The importance of protecting the environment is one, not putting profit over environmental protection. The importance of caring for the poor and providing health care as a human right to all people. This is something that most Muslims agree, and this is from data. This is something that most Muslims agree with in principle. Now, how that happens might be something we disagree on, the mechanism. But when asked, is poverty more a result of people's bad character or bad circumstances? Most Muslims say it's bad circumstances. They are not blaming the person for being poor. Most Muslims also believe in caring for the poor, in providing for people, giving them some minimum amount of a safety net. And then when it comes to healthcare, the idea that people should not have to die or go into bankruptcy if they're sick is something most Muslims agree with. So that is something we know we might have in common more with the left, as is the case with the environment. The other thing is racial justice. Most Muslims are on the side of Black Lives Matter. Most Muslims don't believe people should be killed, when they're unarmed and are usually walking away from the police. So the idea that everything is an overlap with the right except for racism and Islamophobia is not true, okay? There's many things that we also share with the left, but there are also things that we don't share with the left, that we do part paths with them in terms of our mainstream normative beliefs, okay? We do believe in the sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman. We also believe that the only permissible type of sexual intercourse is between a man and a woman within a marriage. These are not things that we're going to wish away or interpret away or pretend don't exist. These things are a part of our faith. And if we have to check these beliefs at the door of inclusion, then that's not inclusion. That is having to remove parts of our limbs to fit into a door. And we reject that as well. So we have to be able to stand on a ground of principle and of being fully who we are to be able to build alliances. Our alliances cannot demand of us a compromise on our fundamental beliefs as Muslims, whether these are alliances with the right or with the left. And so the first guiding principle is to set this up as a place to stand that is around our values, which don't necessarily, fit neatly into one side or the other. The second thing that I think we need to really think through is how do we as a community define success? What does it look like when we've, quote, made it, succeeded? And I'm talking predominantly to people like me, right? Children of immigrants or immigrants ourselves. How do we define success in our country? Is it by following in the footsteps of other immigrant groups like the Italians or the Irish or the Polish people? And oftentimes I get asked this question: how do we learn from them? How do we follow in their footsteps, emulate them? The answer is we don't. Why? Because what happened with these different immigrant groups is they got absorbed, assimilated into American whiteness, right? No one says Italian meaning, an ethnic slur. They're just white. Irish, they're just white, right? There's a book called How the Irish Became White. And if we're not careful, that is how some of us define success, is we get absorbed into the dominant culture. We get to ascend a racial hierarchy and become part of those who are closer to power and have greater proximity to resources. That is the wrong way to define success. Our definition of success has to be not from the script of this country's history or this country's mythical history, but rather what we are taught in our sunnah, in our seerah. If you look at the seerah of the Prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam, he was favored by his people. Not only was he a sadiq al-amin, but he had a noble lineage. He came from noble blood, okay? In our language, he came from privilege. He was never rich, but that wasn't what was important. It was about your bloodline, and he came from the purest, most noble bloodline in Arabia. And yet, though he could have enjoyed this kind of tribal hierarchy and lived a very comfortable life being respected and honored, he didn't do that. He traded that privileged in for principle. And that principle of our faith taught, and he conveyed, that this is not how people should be judged. This hierarchy that existed in his time, this tribal hierarchy that he was at the top of, he dismantled that hierarchy for a different kind of society built upon merit and truth. So he traded in privilege for the sake of principle. Unfortunately, many of us are defining success in a way where we are trading in our principles for the false promise of privilege, for the false promise of being, honorary members of the dominant class, rather than seeking to ascend a racial hierarchy, a class hierarchy. We should be seeking to reimagine and disassemble this hierarchy for a society that is more equitable, a society that is more just. If we stand by this and don't just talk about it, but truly live it by seeing ourselves as not people looking to be accepted, but rather people looking to give back, to have the security within ourselves to actually ask, how do we give to this society? And it's from this place of clarity, of moral clarity, that we will find our allies. We may not know who they will be right now, but they will come to us and we will find them. When you stand on principle, principled people will want to join you. When you want desperately to be accepted, it is going to be you who is compromising for the sake of inclusion and acceptance. And that is not the way of our sunnah. So I want to end with this thought, and I thank you for your attention. This next administration, I think we have a chance to really make a difference. And I challenge us to demand from our elected officials what is good and just for society as a whole, rather than thinking about individual self-interest. Jazakallahu khairan, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallahu khairan, Sister Dalia, and to all our listeners. I think this is a much deeper conversation. Again, I wish we had more time than the time allotted for this. But again, in thinking about who we are and where we are today, and the struggle that the Muslim community had in regards to assimilation, integration, the proximity to whiteness in certain sectors of the Muslim community, and benefiting from that privilege, doesn't often give us the opportunity to take a step back and recognize what our role is. How do we navigate through the political landscape? And how can we really just be of benefit to mankind, benefit to humanity? The Prophet ﷺ was sent as a mercy to mankind. And so for us to be able to be the ambassadors of the Prophet ﷺ, we need to understand the context in which we're living in today. And how do we navigate through that? So folks, we're nearing towards the end. Inshallah, join us. We'll take a break and we'll come back again at 12:30 p.m. for our next session called Managing Your Mental Health in Times of Uncertainty with Dr. Samira Ahmed and Dr. Marwa Azab, inshallah. So Jazakumullahu khairan for joining us. Inshallah, we'll have further conversations on these topics at inshallah throughout time. And click and connect with us at Mass Pace, connect with us at Mass and all the other amazing organizations, AMP. Check out the research and a lot of the research that's been done by ISPU to help us inform these kind of conversations, because our communities are not a monolith. Our communities we're not just painted with one brush. SubhanAllah, there's a lot of differences as Sister Dalia outlined for us. So there's definitely room for conversation. Jazakumullahu khairan. Inshallah, we'll see you at the next session. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك